Good afternoon. This is Don Maxwell from Live IT Academy. Here we are covering our series of creating a workbook and using Excel 2016. Today's topic is going to be on previewing and printing a worksheet or workbook or report in Excel. All right, so generally you have a report that has been completed. And at this point, you want to ensure that your environment allows you to print your report, right? Some environment will or do have restrictions on printing, so be careful to adhere to that. In addition to that, you don't want to print Excel's reports or worksheet blindly. What do I mean by that? Well, there is a rule that I've created that says before you print, you must go to a view page break preview. And the reason for that is, let's go there now. All right, so I have a completed report here, sales forecast, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. If I go to view and I click on page break preview, you will notice that how my report is set up. Right here, for example, you see the number signs in the field. What that's telling me is that the cell itself is too small to display the number. In addition to that, I'm checking for the border of the page. For example, if the page border exceeded multiple pages, these would be blank pages, right? So if I do print, I would be printing blank pages. So that's very important that I check for a situation where I'm not printing blank pages, or I check for a situation where I'm not printing my reports where the labels or the objects within my report are hidden, right? So I want to go and correct the situation. I place my cursor on the crosshairs between the letters. We know that we can adjust by simply either dragging or double clicking, right? I want to maintain my report with double a wrap as far as the header labels, so I'm careful not to drag it too far out. And one of the things that you should understand here is that by just dragging, placing the cursor on the border, see, on that border, it turns into a double arrow. Then I can use my mouse, the select button, to hold on to that arrow, and I can drag that arrow in either directions, right? Look at that. Right, and that's creating multiple pages. So if I should put it on just one page, for example, this would be one page, right? See, my report is not occupying the entire spreadsheet, it's just occupying a very small percentage of that page, right? The other thing I want to verify is what percentage of my report is being printed, right? So if I go to page layout, I could see my scale. I'm looking at 100%, right? So for example, if it were over 100%, I would have created more pages. If it's under 100%, then the font actually gets smaller and smaller. So you have to be careful with that. So the smaller the percentages, the smaller the print, right? So so you want it to rule of thumb between 80 and 100 would be a good percentage print, because you don't want that tiny print report, right? So if I can have 100% here, of course, right? If I do print this 105, I would be printing an extra page. So that's why the rule, I've made that rule that before you print in Excel, you must go to a view page break preview, and then you must go to your page layout and check your scale, right? To make sure that that scale is 100% or between 80 and 100%. Okay? All right, so once you have established that, then it's time to go and look at your print preview. So I'm going to go to File, Print. See, File, Print. Now I have a number of options here in printing. Obviously, what I see here is what I get, right? That's why we said this was a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you're going to get. So if this looks this way on paper, on the view, that's exactly what it's going to print, like on a printer, right? So for example, I'm in landscape. If I should put it in portrait, right? We know portrait is the long, the tall paper up, and landscape is wide paper. Okay. All right. So what we have here is our print button. When we're ready to print, that's the last thing you should touch, right? After confirming everything else is good. How many copies, right? The number here will produce how many copies on the printer, right? And this differs for many folks who have different printers. I happen to have a Brother printer, but you may have an HP or Epson printer. All right, as long as that printer is connected to your computer, it should show in the list of printers. Like, for example, I do have a list of printers here, right? But for you, make sure your printer is connected and that you have established printing on that printer. All right. So further, if your printer has special features, like you can go into the printer properties of your printer itself. There's special features. How do you want your paper to be printed, resolutions, and so on, right? So it just happens to be my printer. Your printer may have different options. Okay, on the settings, this is very important. Print active sheet. Now I only have one sheet, so if it says print active sheet, that's really cool because I'm going to print that one active sheet. But what happens when I have more than one page or more than one sheet in my workbook? Well, I have options. All right, let's go look at the print active sheets. And there's a menu, down arrow, menu arrow. Let's click on that. All right, so I can print entire workbook. This is really cool because if I had multiple sheets in my workbook, for example, if I go back here and I had multiple sheets in my workbook, this is sheet 1, right? But if I had sheet 2 and sheet 3, right, and I wanted to print those sheets, that's what that option gives me, right? That option gives me the ability to print those sheets. If I say print entire workbook, right? So now I have multiple sheets on my workbook if I were to put data on them. The other thing is, in order to print those in the order that you want, then they have to be in the order listed here. That sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. Right, so they would be printed in this order, and you know, if you move around your sheet, that sheet will get printed. So sheet 1 would get printed first. In this case, let's say sheet 2 gets printed, then sheet 3, right? So in this order. So that's very important when you're printing entire workbook. All right, let's go back to print. Right, so that's when you're saying print entire workbook, right? And you'll see down here, if you have multiple pages, page 1 off however many pages that you have, right? So that's, pay attention to this, because if you have sheets that aren't supposed to be printed, this is a good clue to show you that. All right, so we have an option here. We can print selected, so we don't have to print all our data. We can select a portion, a range of the data, and just print what's selected. Sometimes you just want to print a specific data point within your worksheet. So you can say, highlight that area and say print this section, right? So that's a pretty good tool to have. All right. The other thing that we have is to print on one side, right? Print on one side. Let's say if we go back to our report and go to print. Right. Now we have the option, this is a printer specific feature. Some printers allow you to print on double-sided and so on. So this print on one side, print on both sides, only if the printer has the capability of printing on both sides of the page, right? Then that's the only way you can use these other options. Otherwise, they're not available to you. Collated, again, how you're printing, which if you have a stacks of sheets that you're printing, how you want to collate them, in what order you want to print them. And finally, well, we have the portrait. We talked about that. Letter, we can pick and choose the type of paper and the size of paper, right? Whether it's legal, executive, or just letter, 8.5 by 11, right? Versus you can see 8.5 by 14 or 7.25 by 10.5. That's the actual paper size, right? So you can pick that if you want to print different paper size. This is a good one. Wide margins. Well, right now we know there's a margin here and around the paper, right? But so we have a default. I'm simply picking a wide margin, right? You can pick normal margin too, or normal. All right, wide margin or narrow margin right off the bat. But what happens if you don't like either of those margins and you decide you want to create your own margins, right? You can go to custom margins, right? And this is pretty cool, right? So it gives me the top and bottom margin. And by rule of thumb, it's like 1 inch at the top, 1 inch at the bottom. You can have a quarter at the sides, instead of an inch, you can have a 1/4 inch at the sides. Right? And again, this is going to depend on how you were laying out your papers in landscape or portrait, right? And for the header and footer, 0.5 is the norm, right? 0.5 is the norm for header or footer. Okay, so yes, you can adjust your margins to ensure that that the information is being printed on the paper in the right place, right? So because I put 0.25, right? That, all right. So if we go back and put, let's go back and put 1.25, so you can see the difference. 1.25 and 1.25. All right. So this is manual if you want to change it, or you can opt to, or take one of the options here. See, this is the one that we actually picked, 1 and 1.25, right? That's the custom. Normal margin, wide margin, was 1 inch all around, right? And narrow margins. Okay, so that's a pretty cool option button here to allow you to set your margins on your paper, right? And the margin area kind of format your paper, and we generally don't write in the margin area, so that will be just the white area around the document. Then next you have no scaling, and that's what we talked about before when we went to the page when we decided what actual size. So we could say fit on a page. We can determine that we want our report to fit on a page, fit all columns on one page. If you have multiple columns going across pages, fit all rows on a page, and so on, or no scaling, right? So we can choose not to have any scaling, but again, that also can be controlled, as we talked about, by the size, right? So this is a similar window that we did margins, right? So you go margins, you're familiar with that now, but there's a tab, page tab. It's the same dialog box, right? And we can choose portrait or landscape. We can choose the adjustment. As I said, it should be 80 to 100. There are times when you want all your data to fit on one page. Just be careful of the print and whether you want page to be wide or tall or wide, depending on landscape or portrait, the paper, right? Okay. There's one other option here. On the sheet that you're familiar with, header, footer, we talked about that, but on the sheet, right, you have the ability to print. Remember, I said you can select a area out of your worksheet to print, so you can print a particular area. You can put the title. You can say rows to be repeated at the top. That gives you maybe you have a title in your report and you wanted that to repeat it on every top of every page, or columns to be repeated. And you have some additional options. You can print grid lines if you want, black and white, draft quality, row and column heading, right? And this one, page order, is what we saw when we went to the page break preview, and you saw your pages in down, then over, or over, then down. All right, let's take a quick look at this page order again so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, let's click OK here. Let's go back to our report, and here we are, right? And here's what we're talking about, right? As far as the page order. Let me expand. See, 1, 2, 3, over and down, right? So based on the page order, it says over and down. So what does over and down means? Over and then down, or this is down, right? So page 1, page 2, page 3, and so on, right? So that settings, right, on the margin, that settings on the margin is what we're talking about here. We can say down and over, or over and down, right? Over and down and over. That means 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Or we say over 1. If we said it should be over and down, it'll be 1, 2, 3, right? And that's just the page, based on these options, right? Let's go take a look at it. All right, so right now the page based on these options is down then over. We don't have any down pages, so I'm going to make a down page. Okay, so we have some down pages now. So now if I go back to margins, and I can go back to sheets, and I could say, okay, instead of going 1, 2, 3, I'm going to go with the other option, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that's all that is. So that's not a big deal. It's just show you how you're going to print your pages in what order. Okay, and that's the custom margin on the sheet over and down, right? As I said, you also have these print options, grid lines, black and white, draft quality, row and column headings if you want them to be printed or not to be printed. Okay, great job. All right, so a couple of things here. To open the print tab, we can also use the Control P from the keyboard, right? If you hit the Control P from your keyboard, it should automatically open the print tab as well. All right, and we saw where we can change the margin. We can click normal margins, and we can have settings of different area. We have wide and so on, right? And we said also that there's an alternative to the print preview, right? So you can quickly go to sorry about that. All right, so we can quickly look at an alternative to the print preview, right? Which is a page break preview. So if we go to file print, we can determine how it prints on the page, as well as if we go to the view page break preview, we can then determine how it prints on the page as well. So those two options allow you to preview and print a worksheet. Great job, guys. Continue with your training. You're doing a wonderful job, and hope to see you in the next module. Okay?